Hi guys, my name is Dave Webster. I am the pastor of our Both Town Mission, and this is the first of our COVID-19 coronavirus Sunday sermon casts online, whatever you want to call them. Not really a catchy title, is it? Anyway, good to be with you, and yeah, I'm just going to get started with something that I wanted to share with you today, if you're listening to that to this Sunday. But whether it's today, last night, whenever it is you've been watching the news this week, some people probably this week switching on the news every morning, just seeing what's going on, what the updates are on the spread of things. You might be wondering, what the point of all this is. What's going on in the world, what's going on in the country in terms of this COVID-19 coronavirus, the spread of this kind of thing. But when I'm asking that question and saying, what's the point of all this? I don't mean in terms of like the government restrictions and lockdowns and social isolation, that kind of stuff. But I'm meaning to ask that question from a faith perspective, in terms of, from a faith perspective, if we believe that God is ultimately in control, then when we're saying, what's this all about? We're kind of saying, why has God allowed the spread of this virus to take hold of the world in this way? There are people who have died, there are people who are anxious, there's sadly people who probably are going to die in the coming days, weeks, months from this, and there's difficulty in containing and dealing with the virus. And it seems in so many places that the medical resources are just stretched beyond the capacity that they have to deal with this. So I think it's quite, it's okay to ask that question. It's a legitimate question for people of faith, for anyone to say, why has God allowed this? What's the deal here? And unfortunately, like so many things, we don't have the answer to these questions that we would sometimes like. Just like if answers at times of sudden bereavement and other human tragedies, that we just want to know and say, why has God allowed that? And in this lifetime, maybe sometimes with time we see an answer, but also in this lifetime sometimes we will not get the answer, and maybe in eternity we will get the answer, but not for just now. But having said that, what we do have is we have the Bible, and the Bible is a story of, or one way of describing the Bible is a story of God's interactions with people over a long history, where we see that God, whilst God is not the author of suffering, but he has a way of, how would you say, bringing about some sort of purpose through our pain. So to that end, I thought it would maybe be helpful just for just now to briefly look at what I've thought of 5 different situations that we come across in the Bible as you sort of flick through the pages of the Bible, and which show God's continued presence in difficulty. Really, that in amongst all the carnage and everything that's going on, he brings some good about somehow in the process of it all. Maybe that we can't see at the time or see in advance, but nonetheless it's something that God does. So the first of those things, I don't have a particular Bible passage that I'm wanting to share with you just now. What I've got really is just these kind of 5 different situations I'll outline with you from the Bible. And if you've got a Bible and either with you now or at some other point, you could go away and sort of find where these are and read them up for yourself. If you're stuck at home, then you're maybe going to have quite a bit of time that you could do that as some homework if you want to. So the first one is Joseph. Joseph, who was betrayed by his brothers, and this is in the book of Genesis, towards the end of the book of Genesis. You can read about this, so go and find that. If you've got a Bible and you want to kind of read about it, go and do that afterwards. But really the situation is that Joseph was the favourite child, maybe a bit spoilt, and what happened was his brothers got really incredibly jealous, deadly jealous of him, to the point where they were going to kill him, then decided in fact they were going to sell him as a slave to some passing traders. and following that, so he was sold as a slave, taken away down to Egypt, and his father was told the lie that your son has been eaten by wild animals, and here's his coat of many colours covered in blood, which was actually the blood of an animal that they'd killed to cover their tracks. So that's what happens in the story of Joseph. And then, to make matters worse for Joseph, whilst Joseph is in Egypt, he is accused of a crime that he did not commit, like the A-Team and so many other people are accused of crimes he did not commit. In Joseph's case, he really had not committed a crime. He was wrongly accused and he was imprisoned. So that's the sort of the situation that Joseph found himself in. And let's just ask this question: how would Joseph have felt? How do you think you would feel if you were in that situation? So, you know, let's not just read these things as stories and say, oh yeah, well, that's good and maybe it had a happy ending. How would Joseph have felt in amongst that? Imagine your own brothers wanting to kill you. That, you know, actually not like our kids. You know, we've got 4 boys, so, you know, the boys kind of, or even our daughter as well, all kind of wrestling, fighting together. Well, they're not actually trying to kill each other, even if it looks like it. But imagine your own siblings actually trying to kill you, and in fact then changing their mind and saying, no, actually we can make some money out of this, so let's just sell them as a slave. Wow, how would that feel? How would you feel if that was the case? And imagine the pain of being taken as a slave to another country and not getting to say goodbye to your father who you dearly loved. And then imagine the injustice of being put in prison for a crime you had not committed, something you had done, and then just the hopelessness of being like, this is my life, I'm stuck rotting in prison. So that's the situation, that's how it would have felt. But why did God allow it? Let's ask that question. Well, God allowed all this to happen. Ultimately we can look back on it and say, because it uniquely placed Joseph to be in the king's prison at the same time as the king's cupbearer, who through that association, if you go and read it in the Bible, you'll find Joseph was then sort of raised to position as Prime Minister of Egypt, and was in a place where he was not only able to provide wise leadership for the country, to prepare it for a 7-year season of famine that was to come, but also Joseph was in a unique position to effectively save his family group, including his treacherous brothers, or formerly treacherous brothers, to save them from starvation. And as Joseph was able to remarkably go on and say later to his brothers, he said, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. That's in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, just right at the end of the book of Genesis, if you want to go on to read that yourself. So that's the first situation I just want to highlight from the Bible. And the second one, if you jump on just into the next book of the Bible, into the book of Genesis, from Genesis into Exodus, and you find there this situation of a nation of people under slavery, the people of Israel, the Hebrews as they were called at the time. And here's the situation that following Joseph's death, the preceding kings forgot about all that Joseph had done for the nation, and his ever-increasing family group were put into forced slavery by those kings. And so that was the situation. They were oppressed by hard taskmasters for multiple generations. And again, let's ask that question, not only if that's the situation, but how would it have felt? Well, let's just say nobody wants to be a slave, do they? Nobody wants to be forced to work day after day until they've got no strength left to work. It would have been terrible, would it not? And let's though just look at then this next question of, why did God allow it? Why did God allow it? Well, in amongst all the other reasons that maybe you could think of or could come up with or look back on retrospectively on this, one thing that I just reflect on with that is they were unhappy in the situation they were in. That's a huge understatement, of course it is. But their unhappiness with their current situation they find themselves in, and they're calling out for God, the Lord, deliver us from this. That ultimately meant that when God called Moses to come and call the people out of Egypt to go to the land that God had promised them, that they weren't sitting there saying, no, no, we're quite safe, we're quite comfy, we're quite settled here. But actually the terrible situation that they were in actually meant that they were quite ready to go on this unknown journey that was quite a huge undertaking for them to do so. But they were ready for that and ready to move on and get out of where they were, because it was really, frankly, such an awful situation for them. So that's at least one reason why God may have allowed that. But if we jump on again, if we keep doing this as a bit of a whistle-stop tour, if we jump on in our Bibles and we come to this, these people, the Israelites, have gone from Egypt and been in the Promised Land. They've been there for multiple generations. They've entered that land, but basically the story eventually goes on that they are defeated, they are captured, they are uprooted, and they are taken into exile. They're taken away from their God-given homeland and to a foreign country by force. And let's ask that question again. How would it have felt? How would it have felt for them? Well, it would have been a complete and utter disaster. That was where they had, been destined to be, and it was just gone, and they were somewhere totally different, and they couldn't get back, and they had no control over this whatsoever. And let's then ask, well, why did God allow this total and utter disaster? And the answer, and this is an answer that's more clear perhaps than some of the other answers to these situations. The answer that we find in the Bible is that really God allowed this to happen because it gave his people an opportunity to reflect seriously on really the situation that had come about was that they had turned away from God, they'd walked away from God, they'd ignored him, and ultimately after many, many warnings, God had said, look, this is what's going to happen to really get your attention so that you turn back to me and stop walking away from me all the time, forgetting that I am Lord and God. And so that's why God allowed that, to really give them this opportunity for self-reflection, for some serious time to think about turning back to God. So if we jump on again in our sort of whistle-stop tour through the Bible this week, and we come to another situation, having followed on from the people, well, the nation of what was the nation of Israel and became the nation of Judah and so on, and ended up in exile. They returned from exile under the Persian Empire, which followed after the Babylonian Empire, but then that was followed by the various Greek kingdoms that took power after that, following the time of Alexander the Great. And then after a sort of brief period of independence, if you like, they were occupied by the Romans, and that was the situation that continued up until around about the time of Jesus, under occupation by the Romans. And I just want to ask this question again: how would that have felt? Because it's good to relate into the situations that you're thinking about. How would that have felt to be under occupation again and again and again, finally under occupation by the Romans? It wouldn't have been enjoyable. The people would have been frustrated that they're paying taxes to a foreign power. They would be frustrated that they're under the overlordship of a foreign nation, that the soldiers, the troops, the military presence of another country is there, and they're being dictated to and told what to do. They would want their freedom. They would not have liked this. They would be looking for the way out of this. And why was this whole situation? I've got the map behind me. Which side are we? Over here. I feel like the weather girl here, but yeah, in this part of the world here, they're just occupied again and again and again by different, world powers of the day, and they would not have been happy with it. But why? Why did God allow it? Let's move on to ask that question again. Well, for one thing, the fact that they had been under occupation by the Greek kingdoms, that meant that there was a common language with, not just in that area but in wider area around about, Koine Greek, the kind of common Greek that was used as a sort of supra-regional language. That was just a sort of universal language. Maybe we could explain it a bit like English is a universal language across many countries now today. But also, having been under occupation by the Romans, they were part of the Roman Empire, the Pax Romana, the Roman peace that there was sort of spread across much of the known world at that time. Of course, there was the Roman roads that made travel quicker and better. There was just this sort of safety and freedom of travel available at that time. And all of that brought a lot of suffering with it for these people being under occupation. But all of that meant that when you had the time of Jesus coming into the world, and it meant that when you had the early church seeking to spread the good news about God's love and grace through Jesus, that meant that there was this pretty much perfect storm, in a good way, of a situation where there was just this freedom to travel and this common language that allowed the sort of quick and easy and fertile opportunity for the spread of the Christian faith and the Christian message. So that's another example there. And if we just move on to the fifth and final kind of example from the Bible of one of these kind of situations that I want to talk about, it's about the church, the early church that was persecuted and scattered. We can you can read about that in the book of Acts, and you find that following Jesus' life, death, resurrection and return to heaven, that the early church, that when they were filled with the power and presence of God's Holy Spirit, they continued to meet in Jerusalem in the temple courts. And however, what happened was that there was a great persecution that came upon the church. There were arrests, there were executions, the church was scattered in panic, people had to flee to other cities, to other regions. And also, actually, just to kind of add on to that, there's also in AD 49, what happened was that the Jews, including Christian Jews, were expelled from Rome as well. So if you just add that into the mix, there's Christians having to flee and being chucked out of different places around this sort of time period of the early church. A very disruptive time for them, for the early church, for Christians there. Why did God allow that? Let's again go back to that question. Why did God allow that? And the reason is, or at least one of the reasons is, because we can't always have all the reasons for something happening, but one of the reasons was that this persecution that the church faced and having to flee to elsewhere, they took not only their belongings with them, they also took their faith with them. They took the good news message of God's love and grace through Jesus Christ. They took that with them, and it amounted to an unplanned missionary movement that just began and continued and made things go further and faster than they would have gone without this persecution and without this disruption in terms of sharing the Christian faith more widely with others. So let's just bring this home a wee bit and see, what about us? What about us? What's our situation? Our situation at the moment is we are facing the spread of a potentially deadly virus, which has resulted in many of us being stranded at home, people being in self-isolation, practicing social distancing and so on. We are facing a situation where pubs and clubs and schools and libraries and swimming pools and churches and gyms, health centres alike, restaurants and cafes are all being closed down, have been closed down at the moment. How does it feel? Well, some people are really worried. Some people are really worried and anxious, and some people, of course, not just in the nation here, but right across the world, that you can see behind me. Some people have lost loved ones, lots of people. In some families, I read a story the other day, I think it was about a family in New Jersey, where a mother and two daughters from the same family have all died from this virus. People are suffering from bereavement and the trauma of that, and from just being really unwell as well, and the how afraid and scared that can make people as well. Some people, of course, will feel helpless. Some people might feel sort of frustrated that can't normal life just go on, because we're a bit frustrated that we can't just get on with our normal activities. Of course, there's all these emotions and feelings in here. So why has God allowed this? Well, as I've said at the outset, I don't know. I don't have all of the answers. But having looked back just at these kind of stories and examples from the Bible, we can see that God is not absent when calamity happens, when calamity strikes. In fact, what we can see is that in amongst the carnage of a life that doesn't always seem to make sense, we can be encouraged that God is very much at work, and that we can trust Him to bring purpose out of our pain that we experience with all the things that go on in life. And so I just want to close by telling you a story about a man called George Wishart. This is a story I remember first hearing back when I was at university several years ago now. And George Wishart was a Scottish pastor, Scottish reformer, and he heard in Dundee at a time where there was plague in Dundee. It was in, if I just check my notes, 1545. When he heard there was plague in Dundee, he hurried back to the city, and he preached the good news to those who were dying. He cared for those who were sick, and on one occasion he stood up on the city wall at a place called the Cowgate, and he preached to those who were inside the city, the inhabitants there, and also to those who were outside, who were sort of those who were being quarantined outside and who had the plague. And as he came down from there, and people were kind of worried about his health, obviously, kind of being around those with the plague and those who didn't have the plague. But just another part of his story, as if the danger of the plague wasn't bad enough, was that when he came down the steps from the city wall there was an assassin waiting for him, an assassin sent by Cardinal Beaton, who was the head of the anti-Reformation church of the time, the established anti-Reformation church of the time. And there was an assassin waiting there with his hand inside his cloak with a knife in it. And as George Wishart came down, he saw the man with the concealed hand, and he realised the situation there, and he grabbed the man's hand, pulled the knife out of it, and obviously was saved from being assassinated there. But the remarkable thing there is he then went on to protect this man who was going to kill him, went on to protect this man from the crowd who then wanted to kill the would-be assassin. Remarkable story. But the story of George Wishart continues. There's more to it, but he ended up being martyred for his faith. But in terms of the plague in Dundee, after that incident, things went on. The story continues that the plague began to recede, and I'll just read this out. It says, "And a new life was soon felt in the stricken city." That's from John Knox's account of these events. A new life was soon felt in the stricken city. And of course that's a lovely thought for us to hold on to. And George Wishart, he continued to go on to organise the distribution of food and medical supplies for those who were in need as the plague continued to recede. But the reason I want to just share that story with you is just to use that as an example of the kind of people that we can be at a time of crisis. That was a great time of crisis historically in this general area, and that was how one person chose to be in amongst all of it. Now, of course, we don't ultimately know why the crisis that we're facing is happening, other than the practical reasons of infection and so on that brought it about. But we do know that we have a God who can be trusted to still be at work in our lives, and we can also choose, like George Wishart did, to be people of great value at a time of great difficulty. Okay, so that's me done for just now, and amen. Hope that's helpful for you in some way. And just to say that if you're watching this as part of our church family on Sunday morning, 21st of March, then you can follow the link in the email that hopefully you will be sent well before 12 o'clock, because at 12 noon we will be opening up our sort of Zoom video conference to have a catch up and taking time to pray together. So great, see you there if you're joining us.